Lately, time may feel a little different for you. Not faster or slower, just unfamiliar in a quiet way. The past doesn't seem to pull at you like it once did, while the future feels closer. Not imagined or planned, but gently present, as if it's already shaping your choices. This can feel unsettling if you try to explain it logically. But what if this feeling isn't misalignment at all? What if it's simply a sign that you're no longer chasing the future because something ahead of you is already responding? This isn't imagination, and it isn't intuition acting at random. It's a subtle signal that your relationship with time itself is beginning to change. In classical thinking, the future is something you chase. In quantum reality, the future is something you resonate with. Physics has already shown that time is not strictly linear at the fundamental level. Effects can precede causes. Information can influence the present before it fully materializes. When consciousness becomes coherent enough, it begins to receive feedback from potential futures, not as visions, but as subtle shifts in preference, behavior, and attention. That's why certain choices suddenly feel obvious, while others lose their emotional charge altogether. You might notice that decisions are happening faster, with less internal debate, or that old goals no longer create the same pull, even if they once felt essential to your identity. This isn't procrastination or boredom. It's alignment. When a future version of you becomes energetically dominant, the present version begins reorganizing itself to match. The signal comes first. The structure follows. Think of it like tuning into a radio station. You don't create the music by turning the dial. The music already exists. You simply adjust the frequency until the signal becomes clear. Right now, many people are experiencing that adjustment. The noise of old timelines fades. The signal of a new reality becomes stronger. And the strangest part is that it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calm, certain, almost inevitable. Neuroscience offers an interesting parallel. The brain constantly simulates future states to guide present behavior. When a simulation becomes more coherent than your current reality, your nervous system starts treating it as the new reference point. Your habits, emotional reactions, and even your sense of identity begin to shift in anticipation. This is why it can feel like your future self is influencing you now. Because at a neurological level, it is. Spiritually, this has always been described as a calling. Not a voice, not a command, but a pull, a sense that you're being drawn forward, without needing to understand every step. The mistake many people make is trying to force clarity too early. They demand details, when what's actually happening is orientation. Your inner compass is recalibrating. The map comes later. This is especially relevant as we move toward 2026. Not as a date, but as a threshold. A year that carries the energetic signature of initiation, identity reset, and new cycles. Long before the external world reflects that shift, consciousness begins adjusting internally. The future you are becoming starts sending signals backward through your attention, shaping what you care about, what you tolerate, and what you no longer need to prove. If you felt moments of déjà vu without images, certainty without evidence, or detachment without sadness, you're not disengaging from life. You're disengaging from a version of life that no longer matches where you're going. This is why the future can feel closer than the past. The past is complete. The future is active. And when a future becomes active in the field, It doesn't wait for permission. It begins calling you. Through subtle changes in behavior, focus, and desire. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just consistently enough that ignoring it becomes harder than listening. In the next part, we're going to explore the version of you that already exists in the quantum field, and why responding to that signal is not about visualization or effort, but about coherence. There is a version of you that does not live in the future as an idea, but already exists as a configuration in the field, not as a fantasy, not as a goal, but as a real possibility that becomes accessible the moment your internal state stops contradicting it. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of quantum manifestation. People assume they are trying to create something new, when in reality they are learning how to stop interfering with what is already forming. In quantum physics, possibilities exist as probabilities until an observer locks into one through coherence. Consciousness doesn't invent outcomes, it selects them. When your identity, nervous system, and emotional state align with a particular configuration, that version becomes dominant. This is why manifestation doesn't respond to desire alone. Desire is noisy, coherence is precise, and the field responds to precision. This is where the idea of the future self becomes practical rather than abstract. Your future self isn't a distant version you chase. It's a frequency you begin to inhabit. The moment you start responding differently to life with less urgency, less resistance, and more internal stability, you're already interacting with that version. The field doesn't care about what you say you want. It responds to how you are organized internally right now. Neuroscience mirrors this perfectly. The brain is constantly predicting and adjusting based on expected outcomes. When a new internal model becomes more stable than the old one, behavior changes automatically. You don't force new habits. Old ones simply lose relevance. This is why some changes feel effortless while others never stick. Effort tries to override identity. Coherence replaces it. Spiritually, this has always been described as embodiment, not imagining a new life but living from a different center. When embodiment begins, manifestation stops feeling like a technique and starts feeling like feedback. Reality reflects you faster, not because time speeds up but because resistance slows down. Less internal conflict means fewer delays. You may notice that you're no longer negotiating with yourself the way you used to. Decisions feel quieter. Boundaries feel clearer. You're less reactive to things that once triggered you. This is not emotional numbness. It's integration. The version of you that already exists in the field does not carry the same emotional charge as the old one. It doesn't need to prove, chase, or overcorrect. It moves with precision, not urgency. An analogy helps here. Imagine two versions of a software running simultaneously. The outdated version consumes energy, crashes often, and needs constant fixes. The updated version runs efficiently, quietly, and without friction. When the system begins switching over, you don't immediately see new features. You feel stability first. That's what's happening now. The update is installing. This is why visualization alone often fails. Visualizing without coherence is like downloading software but never installing it. The field responds when the internal system is ready to run the new identity consistently, and readiness doesn't feel exciting. It feels grounded. If you've been sensing that your life is simplifying, that you're less interested in forcing outcomes and more aware of subtle internal signals, this is a sign that the future version of you is no longer distant. It's active, and the present is adjusting accordingly. Take a moment right now and type in the comments, "I'm aligning with my future self," not as an affirmation, but as a signal to yourself that you recognize what's happening and you're choosing coherence over control. In the next part, we're going to talk about the signs that you're already living in the transition phase, and why what feels like a pause is actually a crossing between realities. There is a phase between realities that rarely gets talked about because it doesn't look like progress from the outside. Nothing explodes. Nothing dramatically changes. Yet internally, almost everything feels different. This is the transition phase, the space where one reality is dissolving and the next hasn't fully stabilized yet. And if you're here, the signs are subtle but unmistakable. One of the clearest signals is a shift in what drains you. Conversations that once felt stimulating now feel heavy. Environments you used to tolerate suddenly feel misaligned. You're not judging them, you're just less available for them. This isn't superiority or detachment from life. It's energetic efficiency. When your frequency changes, your system becomes less willing to spend energy where there is no resonance. Another sign is the way effort feels in your body. Tasks that align with where you're going feel lighter, even if they're unfamiliar. Tasks tied to the old identity feel exhausting, even if you're good at them. This isn't laziness, it's feedback. The nervous system is recalibrating around a different center, and it communicates through sensation before thought. Your body knows where coherence lives long before your mind can justify it. You may also notice a strange relationship with time. Moments of stillness feel full instead of empty. Waiting no longer feels like punishment. There's less urgency to figure everything out and more tolerance for letting things unfold. This is not passivity. It's trust emerging organically as internal conflict dissolves. When you stop fighting yourself, time feels different. An analogy helps here. Think of switching lanes on a highway. There's a brief moment when you're not fully in the old lane and not yet settled in the new one. That moment can feel exposed if you focus on it too much, but it's also the only way forward. The mistake is trying to accelerate too fast just to escape the discomfort. Smooth transitions require awareness, not force. Spiritually, this phase has always been associated with liminality, the threshold state. You're no longer defined by who you were, but you're not performing who you're becoming yet. This can feel like silence where there used to be noise. But silence is not emptiness. It's potential without interference. The quantum field responds most clearly in this space because you're not broadcasting conflicting signals. Neuroscience reflects this beautifully. When old neural patterns weaken and new ones aren't fully consolidated yet, the brain enters a highly plastic state. This is when learning, adaptation, and identity shifts happen fastest. It can feel disorienting if you expect certainty, but it's incredibly fertile if you allow it. This is the phase where small choices carry disproportionate impact because the system is still setting its baseline. You might find yourself drawn to simplification, fewer goals, fewer explanations, fewer commitments, not because you're shrinking your life, but because you're refining it. Complexity was useful when you were learning who you were. Precision becomes essential when you start living as who you are. This is why overthinking feels especially draining right now. The system is asking for alignment, not analysis. If you've been feeling like you're between chapters, that's not a metaphor, it's an accurate description of your state. You are between realities, and the reason it doesn't feel dramatic is because real transitions don't shout, they reorganize quietly. The future doesn't crash into the present, it integrates. This is why forcing manifestation during this phase often backfires. You're not meant to push outcomes yet. You're meant to stabilize orientation. Once orientation locks in, outcomes follow naturally. The field moves quickly when the signal is clean. In the final part, we'll explore how to respond to this transition without forcing the timeline and how to anchor what's emerging so it doesn't dissolve once life speeds up again. When people sense that a new reality is forming, the instinctive reaction is to rush, to act, to force clarity, to accelerate the outcome so the discomfort of transition disappears faster. But responding to a calling from your future self does not require urgency. In fact, urgency is often the only thing that can distort the signal. The future you're aligning with is not asking you to move faster, it's asking you to move cleaner. The most common mistake during this phase is trying to do something dramatic to overhaul life, to make bold external changes before the internal frequency is fully stabilized. But quantum transitions don't respond to dramatic gestures. They respond to consistency. The field doesn't reorganize around intensity, it reorganizes around coherence. and coherence is built through small, precise shifts repeated over time. This is why forcing visualization, affirmations, or rigid routines can feel strangely counterproductive right now. Those tools work when identity is stable, but during a transition, the system is still updating. What's needed is not pressure, but anchoring, a way to gently reinforce the emerging identity without collapsing back into old patterns or jumping ahead of integration. Think of it like learning a new language. You don't become fluent by shouting words louder or memorizing everything at once. Fluency comes from daily exposure, repetition, and context. The same is true for a new reality. You stabilize it by living from it in subtle ways. How you speak to yourself, how you respond to uncertainty, how you give meaning to silence instead of filling it with noise. This is where intentional practices matter, not as manifestation hacks but as grounding mechanisms. Writing, reflection, symbolic actions, and conscious language are powerful because they communicate directly with the subconscious and nervous system. They help your identity recognize itself. They turn an internal shift into something embodied and repeatable. When an old identity is dissolving and a new one is forming but hasn't fully locked in yet, it helps you understand what's happening internally, why certain emotions and patterns are fading, and how to move through this transition without second-guessing or self-sabotage. It's not about manifesting more things. It's about stabilizing who you are becoming. Alongside it comes the Quantum Grimoire, a practical companion designed to help you anchor this rebirth through conscious writing, intention setting, and symbolic practice. The grimoire isn't about superstition. It's about giving your nervous system and subconscious a language to work with, a way to encode coherence daily so the new reality doesn't fade when life speeds up again. Together, they are meant to support this moment, when your future self is already calling and the only question left is how gently and consistently you answer. You don't need to rush. You don't need to force outcomes. You don't need to prove anything. You simply need to respond with presence. If something in you recognizes this transition, not with excitement but with quiet certainty, your future self isn't calling for action. It's calling for alignment, and that alignment is already within reach.